And welcome to Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and I'm your host for this program. We hope that this program helps give our viewers more insight into the goings-on around our capital. Our guest today is a gentleman who's been successful in the state legislature and now most recently has been successful on the statewide scene in his election as our new treasurer. And without further ado, I'd like to bring us to Jim Hill, new treasurer for the state of Oregon.
Yes, good morning, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you on the show. It's a nice chance to chat with you a little bit about Jim Hill the person, Jim Hill the politician, Jim Hill the statesman. I'd like to jump right in and ask a little bit about your background. I know some of the story about when you came to Oregon and everything, but some of the viewers may be interested in who is this guy? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, Kevin, I moved to Oregon in 1974. And like yourself, worked at the Oregon Department of Justice in the Attorney General's office. Worked there for 3 years, worked as a hearings referee for the Oregon Department of Revenue for 3 years, and then in 1980 made the big decision to run for the state legislature. I lost that election by 61 votes and ran for election again in 1982, was elected, then re-elected to the House in 84, elected to the Senate in 86, and then midterm through my second term in the Senate, ran for state treasurer and was fortunate enough to be elected.
Now, that's a good thumbnail sketch, but I want to take you back to, say, school days. Tell us a little bit about your college, law school education.
Well, I went to law school at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, and I think my law school education was very important in deciding to enter politics. My favorite course was constitutional law, and of course I was interested in that because of growing up in Atlanta, Georgia is my hometown. I grew up in a racially segregated South, and equal rights, of course, is something that has been very important to me, and I think probably more than anything is a reason why I entered into politics, subject to racial discrimination, riding the back of the bus, segregated schools, could not go to theaters, restaurants, and so I grew up in an environment that was politically very active. I had the privilege of meeting Martin Luther King when I was growing up in Atlanta on several occasions when I worked for, at the time, was the only black-owned commercial bank in the country. So that, I think all of those, that environment in Atlanta, and also Atlanta had a very strong black business community, which was somewhat uncommon. And working at the bank, I think, had something to do with being interested in being a treasurer, being interested in financial matters. And so in addition to getting my law degree, I also got my MBA. And
that's Masters of Business
Masters in Business Administration. And I think what happened as things progressed, I started to make a decision to move more into the financial area and move away from the law.
Now let me pause right there, though. I want to go back still. You know.
Okay.
I want to hear a little bit more about your mother, because I've seen your mother here in Oregon several times. She's a dynamic lady, and she had a lot of impact on your upbringing. I remember your very moving remarks when you were sworn in as treasurer. Well, can you tell us a little bit about your mom and your relationship with her?
Well, my mother, and you've met her, and she truly is a very, very dynamic woman. But you learn about that as you get older, as you raise your own children. My mother insisted that I get a good education. I mean, it was always understood that I would get a good education. And she truly sacrificed. I went away to high school in a Catholic military academy because of racially segregated schools. My mother felt that I would not be able to get a good education. And she did this all by herself. My mother and father were divorced when I was 5, so she made that financial sacrifice not only to send me to out-of-state to college, but out-of-state to high school. And when you think back on it, that's really just extraordinary.
Can I interrupt for a minute and ask, is that why you don't have a Southern accent?
It's really amazing. When I go back to Atlanta, and people who, if someone goes back to Atlanta with me or visits me in Atlanta, they say that my Southern accent comes back when I'm at home. But I think you're probably right. I went to the Catholic military high school that I went to was in Virginia, and of course Indiana and Michigan State. So somewhere along the line I may have lost, but every now and then I guess people say it comes out.
Well, Peter Courtney has a bit of a West Virginia accent that comes out every once in a while. He harkens from West Virginia, as I recall.
Yes.
So we all have our background that we bring with us sometimes.
That's right.
But I've never really noticed anything of an accent with you. That's why I was curious about.
Well, I don't slip in and out of it like Peter does. I've been sitting next to Peter at times, and he will be, suddenly I will hear this southern accent just come out. And I think he sort of does it on purpose.
Well, what made you decide to come to Oregon in 1974?
Well, it was really it was a job opportunity, but contrary to what most people say when that saying, visit but don't stay, attracted me. I said, there must be something good out there. People want to keep it to themselves. So actually it made me curious, and so one of the attorneys general's office that I applied to was Oregon, and they hired me, and I did not know anyone out here, but when I came out for the interview, I was impressed just in walking from the motel up to my job interview that how friendly people were. I mean, literally stopping and saying hello on the way, and it struck me. And I have found Oregonians to be extremely friendly, and also that had a lot to do with me running for office. If I thought that this was a hostile community, as some people thought. Some people, as you know, when I first decided to run, they thought that it was a big mistake because they just didn't think that a black person could be elected. But I found it to be a very, very friendly community, and so when I got the job offer, I moved out.
Well, in fact, you ran in a very seemingly conservative district. Not that necessarily has to mean that people are not that they're racially biased, but politically conservative. And you had quite a challenge going door to door. And I know you barely were edged out the first time around, but in '82 you got elected to the House.
Yes.
And I think your reputation at that time was particularly strengthened by the reputation for hard work. That is, people knew you were out there door to door, every day, meeting people and helping win them over to your cause, despite the fact that they may have been more conservative politically than you. Well, how do you analyze that first successful election?
Well, I think that you're right. Actually, when I lost that first election, people were surprised by how close it was, and that showed me that what we had done, and mainly was going door to door, because really. The political action committees, they just didn't think I had a chance, so they really did not give me any money. But going door to door, I was well received, and I did it because I did not have the money, and I felt that I wanted people to meet me, and people were extremely friendly, and I think that I tried to tell people in my campaign committee that being black was really an advantage because people would remember me. And I didn't know whether they'd vote for me or not, but I knew that they would remember me. And I have to say, I miss, from this last statewide campaign, I miss going door to door. I got to the point that I'd done it so much I'd actually, and I know you experience the same thing, you sort of know who's going to come to the door, and you visit with people that you haven't seen. And I think when you go to a statewide office, keeping in touch is one of the things that you have to really strive to do. And door to door, I think, was just the best way.
Well, as we pause going door to door, I'll mention that you're with us on Capital Insight. I'm your host, Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem. Our guest today is former Senator Jim Hill, also former Representative Jim Hill, now State Treasurer Jim Hill. And we'll be talking a little more about elections in a moment. But I'd like to mention, if you ever have any questions or concerns, feel free to write me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon, 97310. Also, during the session, feel free to call 378-8893. We welcome your questions and comments about public policy issues. And now, returning to our guest, Jim Hill, we're talking about your campaigning door to door and getting into the House. What were some of the hot issues that arose during the early '80s as you served in the legislature?
Well, I guess some ways things haven't changed very much. Some of it was still the whole issue of property taxes and property tax relief as it was talked about in those days. But also, Kevin, I think the most unfortunate issue that plagued our community, is one that you've worked on and are working on as well, is crime. It was a shock to suddenly see how, from going door to door, from campaign to campaign, you started to see more beware of dog signs, more burglar alarms and those kind of things in the city, and as well as out in rural areas. And we were the first, of course, to experience the prison overcrowding problem. I don't think we quite knew what it was at the time, but that was really the big issue. And I never would have thought that I would have spent so much of my political time working on an issue like prisons. But it's something that was affecting our community so much. And I think the thing about the current budget situation that we're going through is the thought that if we go through these cuts, all of the things that we have done to basically regionalize the prisons, take some of the burden off of Salem, I mean, to have that go away, I mean, it was years of work to get that done. And
And looking at the whole crime and prison issue, and you were one of the major advocates for prison construction, for which I thank you. That was even before my service in the legislature. Your '87 session, you began moving on major prison construction using lottery money, and I came in '89, where at least we could start dealing with the criminal laws and doing something to make use of those facilities as they went online and as we continued to construct them. But looking at where we are right now, we are sort of at the edge of a precipice in terms of crime control, looking at cuts in cutting back, 10% cutback in prison bed facilities in the governor's budget proposal. Of course, all the other things that prevent crime, cutting back on education and human resources. And it's all self-imposed. There is no, people are right when they say there's no financial crisis in state government, in the sense that the economy, although it's not perky, is actually doing all right.
Sure.
But it's a self-imposed crisis where we've said property tax rates have to go down. And sure, for some people the assessed value went up and they still paid more, but many businesses and people are paying less. But we said state government has to pay the tab. And I wonder, do a lot of people not understand that the state does not receive those property taxes? It only goes to schools and local government, and now we have to pay for more services that used to be paid for by property taxes, which is what creates this $1.2 billion problem shortfall. What do you run into in terms of that issue?
Well, I don't know if people have a specific understanding. I think that they do have a general understanding of the tax situation in general, and I think that they're just right now, they're looking to get some kind of direction as to where we really are. I think that they're skeptical right now about the cuts being made, about whether making these cuts will have a detrimental impact. But for our community in particular, when there's a cut in state services, this community is really going to, there's going to be a tremendous impact on this community. And I think the only way that you really educate people about the tax system is when there is a vote. I think people know, I'm sure that people know that there is a problem. I don't think that we have been good enough in really getting the message out as to exactly what the problem is. I think the main way that you get people to be interested in something is to have a vote. The governor did a good job with her conversations with Oregonians, but really to truly engage the most people, I think you have to have an election, and that's when people really pay attention, and I think that's when people educate themselves. Because right now people are going about their everyday life and just not, they have things to look at other than what we look at all the time, and I think that I think they want to vote. I think people want to see what the problem is and then cast a vote, and I think that's the way you educate people.
I'm going to pause again for a moment. We're halfway through our program, and thank our viewers for joining us on Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix, your host, and our guest today is Now, I keep wanting to say Senator, but Treasurer Jim Hill, recently elected Treasurer of the state of Oregon. And again, if you have any questions or concerns at any time, feel free to write to me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon, 97310. And during the session, we do have telephone service at the Capitol. You can call 378-8893 to reach my office. I'll mention as an aside that unfortunately, because I'm in committee and on the floor, I'm not usually in my office, but I have staff there, and we certainly will be attendant to any questions or concerns which you may have. Now, returning to Jim, we were talking a little bit about the whole financial issue. As you ran for treasurer last year, did you pick up some particular perceptions about how people feel about government finance and all of that? And I'll also in a few minutes ask you about the job of treasurer and misperceptions we may have. But what did you pick up running around statewide campaigning last year?
Well, it was amazing the diversity of opinion, and I found really the most fascinating and area was east of the mountains, where people are typically very conservative about many things and conservative about financial matters. But it was interesting to learn why Measure 5 there was not one county east of the mountains voted for Measure 5. And I think the reason why is because you have a smaller population and great distances, and people know that what government services mean to them. And they know about it in a very personal way. I mean, over in Eastern Oregon, they know the homeless person. They know that person's name. They know who it is. It's not just a faceless human being out there. And when services are cut, they know who it affects. And so I found it very interesting that people there had more of an appreciation of the need for the services, even though they're very, very conservative fiscally. But as you go around the state, I think that what you have is this situation where people understand that the economy is better, but we have a lot of people working, but they're making less money is the situation. So I think that's one of the things that creates a difficult political situation for us, because as you look at it, I mean, the revenues are coming into state government pretty well. And so from this side, you look at the revenues that are coming in, you have this feeling of prosperity, but you get out and you have situations where you have both people in a family working, and they're just barely getting by. So then their message is tightened back, because we can't afford to pay anymore. So I'm one of those people, in addition to crime when I first ran for office. Economic development was the issue, maybe even more than crime. It was always close for both. As to which one was at the top. But I have not lost sight of I'll never forget campaigning during the recession. Going door to door during the recession in the early 80s was
depressing a good word?
It was depressing, and it made an indelible imprint on me, and that's why, in addition to investing funds to get a good rate of return for retirees, we really are looking for every way that we can to invest in Oregon's economy to create decent paying jobs, because I think that the economy underlies all. If people feel as though that they're doing well economically, I don't think they have any problem voting for schools and for government services. It's just when things are tight for them, their message is, things are tight for me. You have to tighten up as well. So I think we should never lose track, even in these good times, about the importance of continuing to do everything we can to create decent paying jobs. And the talk of diverting the lottery funds away from economic development. I know there are a lot of funds now, and maybe there are some things, but boy, I have to say, I would hope that still the majority of those funds would be dedicated to economic development, because the jobs underlie everything.
Well, right now, one of the things we're seeing is sort of siphoning off lottery funds, building them into the budget and actually, I think my vision is it's like weeds growing throughout the budget, is the lottery money is being spread out and it's getting connected to all kinds of things. And each of them on its face, you could say, well, that's an economic development project, but it's not really core economic development, which is building family wage jobs for the community. And it's interesting that you raised that issue, because you were one of the people who were there as we developed the lottery and as the economic development theme was being pushed. I have to admit, I'm one of those people that's throwing out the notion of, well, do you want to fund education with lottery dollars? But we have to have this debate. Isn't economic development a way of funding future development for the community, future jobs, future education, future government even?
Kevin, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the lesson that you learn is you have to prepare for the bad times and good times. And unfortunately, the political process seems to be a very short-term focus. And we're looking at what is happening now, and instead of planning for what's going to happen in the future. I think that, see, if people have decent paying jobs, you have the funds and the political environment to build programs. I mean, I think that your statement about how we've sort of turned in on ourselves is really accurate, and I think it's very sad. I mean, if we really hurt our institutions, especially education, you don't just turn a switch to rebuild them. There's damage that is done, and it takes a long time. There's damage that's done to the reputation of the schools. The same is true for higher ed as well as K through 12. But I do believe if people felt that we were really doing things to really try to stimulate the economy, to try to get things going, I honestly believe that they would be more willing to look at other sources of revenue and tax reform and those kind of things. Because I don't believe that Oregonians are stingy. I don't believe that they're insensitive. I don't believe that it is that they don't care. I think that when you're in a sort of a survival mode, just barely making it, that's just not sufficient. And say, well, I want you to pay more taxes, that message is not there. But if people know that you're really trying to constantly do things, and as we are really to create decent paying jobs, I think they're more willing to go along with things. But you do have to keep some money dedicated to creating jobs, because I think if you do that, I think it solves a lot of your other problems.
Let me pause for a moment again and mention to our audience that you're with us on Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, your host, and our guest is Treasurer Jim Hill. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to write to me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon, 97310. And during the session, which runs who knows how long, but at least through June perhaps, you can reach me at 378-8893. Well, we've been talking a lot about economic issues, and I really should ask you about the role of the treasurer in all of this, because a lot of folks may be curious about, well, what does the treasurer actually do? So why don't you tell us?
Well, the treasurer basically invests funds on behalf of the public employee retirement system. It invests funds for local governments. It deals with the issuance of debt by state agencies, and it helps coordinate the issuance of debt by state agencies and local governments. But in the area of economic development, in the treasurer's office, obviously, the fund, by the way, is right now is $22 billion. I mean, to give you a basis of comparison, the state's budget is, depending, I guess, which one you look at, is a little over $6 billion. And Kevin, by the time that my four-year term is up, we expect that fund to be at $40 billion.
Shouldn't we mention, too, that this is one thing that government's been doing right for a long time now, that we have one of the best funded funds going? Tell us about that.
It truly is. It is one of the few truly adequately funded pension programs, public pension programs in the nation. Pension funds have had all kinds of trouble. Of the 1,000 top pension funds, public and private, Oregon's is number 29. So it is a tremendous fund, and of course the responsibility of investing those funds is really very, very heavy. And one of the duties that I have as being elected treasurer is to really make sure that we have the accountability and all of the safeguards in place that's commensurate with a fund of that size.
It's part of the problem that there's always the temptation by politicians in the legislature to raid those funds, to try to figure out ways of forcing their investment in what might be unwise investments just to try to pump our own economy temporarily, things like that.
That's true. I have, in terms of, and I'm an advocate of economic development, but I am very, very cognizant that the first responsibility is to the retirees. We invest those funds according to the prudent person investment rule, and we cannot just invest in any economic development project. I mean, it has to be something that will give us the rate of return that would be, excuse me, appropriate under the prudent person investment rule. So you don't, it's not the kind of fund that you would just use for anything. I think that's what the lottery really is for.
Okay, and actually you've been an advocate for this, I'll call it bifurcated approach, as far as maybe a triple approach, but as far as the retirement pension fund, you've certainly said to the extent that you can make prudent investments in Oregon, you want to do that.
Definitely, and we're looking hard. And there's a true emphasis. There's a difference between saying this is what we want to do and really going out. And we've invited economic development, people who are involved in economic development. We've apprised them of what our criteria are, and then we ask them to give us their short list of projects.
And then riskier things, we can use the lottery money for those kinds of, not bad risks, but more risky economic development projects.
That's exactly right, and not risk pension funds. And I know that the fund is large, and people say, well, there's a pot of money. But the stock market, the decision was made some time ago under when Governor Bob Straub was treasurer that we would invest in equities. And that really is one of the reasons why the fund is as successful as it is. But we've had probably the longest bull market now in history, and that fund could, if the stock market takes a plunge, I mean, in 1987 it went down 500 points in a day. The value can be eroded. So there's good times and bad times, and so you can say, well, there's a big pot of money and we should go raid it now. As you know, there's going to be a lot of pressure on retirement as people our age start to retire. I mean, it's going to be a huge number of people who are going to be retiring at the same time. It's going to put a heavy burden on a lot of retirement plans, pension funds, and Social Security. So it's one of those things that you just have to keep as strong as possible, and I think it's just wrong to talk about raiding the fund in order to solve the state's fiscal problems, because you are talking about people's retirement, and that money has to be there when they retire.
Good for you. Well, let me ask you this. We have about 1 minute left. How do you feel about the next couple of years and what you'll be doing as treasurer? How do you feel about going into this job?
Being treasurer is truly a wonderful job. We have a relatively small staff. We have 67 employees, and it really is a good staff. There are some areas that we need to bolster, and we've learned that the situation that occurred is, there was a situation where someone was indicted and pled guilty to racketeering, and we saw that as a warning that what we must do is make sure that we have the procedures and accountability in place where you can really account for and manage $40 billion. You cannot muddle through managing $40 billion.
And that's what you've been doing. You've already been actively working on developing an auditing system that will be more aggressive, working with the Secretary of State's office and that sort of thing.
Yes, a number of things were started before I came into office to give credit where credit is due, and we're continuing those things, and it's going to be a continuing process because it was a small fund.
Well, on that cue, a continuing process, we'll watch the continuing story of Jim Hill, State Treasurer, and thank you for joining us today.
Kevin, it's a pleasure, and I really enjoy this. This is a good thing that you're doing here.
And I thank our audience for joining us. You're with us on Capital Insight. See you next time.